Charlie Kirk himself. I'm going to show a quick video before we go to the ranking member of him speaking on this precise subject, and I hope everyone would listen closely and heed his warning.
Now on Thursday, more violence from the radical left, this time directed at Turning Point USA and their group on the campus of UC Davis. Here with more, Turning Point USA founder, CEO Charlie Kirk. It's interesting, we were texting, about a week ago? And I kept saying, it takes a lot of courage for you and your group and these young kids to be setting up in these hostile environments on college campuses. And, lo and behold, it's not the first time it's happened, but we'll show the video as you're speaking. Tell us everything that went on.
Yeah, it's shocking stuff. And it's a pattern now. We're seeing this happening on more and more campuses. So at the University of California, Davis, our brave Turning Point USA chapter was set to host Brandon Tatum as a Prove Me Wrong event. Goes up, sets a table. Anyone can go and have free speech and dialogue if they disagree. Antifa showed up, full masked. Black outfits. They came in, took our gear, destroyed our tables, basically made the students had to flee, and the police did nothing to intervene, nothing whatsoever. Our courageous students had such resolve and fortitude that after this incident happened, they regathered and tried to do the event still about an hour later, but it wasn't the same, of course. This is after one of our Turning Point USA students at University of Texas, Dallas, had a bike lock thrown at her and actually had to be hospitalized for this treatment. Sean, we are seeing a disturbing pattern from the radical left, and we have data to now support it. According to the National Contagion Research Institute, 48% of left-of-center respondents say that it's justified to murder Elon Musk. 53% say that it would be justified to murder President Donald Trump. There are ballot measures in California that are being measured by far-left activists that are being named, I should say, after Luigi Maggioni. We have to take a step back here and ask our question, what's really going on here? There's a deeper thing than just political disagreement. If you are on the front lines like our Turning Point USA students, you are potentially putting your safety, your well-being, and God forbid, your life in jeopardy for simply being a
Constitution to order. Hearing for today is on politically violent attacks and the threat to our constitutional order. I'll give my opening statement, then we'll go to the ranking member, and then after we might do a second round of opening remarks, introduce the witnesses, swear you guys in, and then get rolling with questions. For the past 15 months, political violence has been a constant fact of American life. We've seen arsons and bombings, armed ambushes and assaults, sniper attacks and mass shootings, riots, and violent mobs on our city streets. We've seen assassinations. We've seen murder. We've seen death. None of this is random. It's organized, coordinated political terror. The people behind this violence are not common street criminals. They're not driven by money or drugs or gangland turf disputes. They're determined, militant extremists who wield violence for political ends. They know that their vision would never win at the ballot box, so they've chosen terrorism instead. They know their ideas could not win in the marketplace of ideas, so they shoot up the marketplace. Last year, President Trump survived not one, but 2 assassination attempts. In Butler, Pennsylvania, he escaped a sniper's bullet by a centimeter in a split second. Only weeks later, in West Palm Beach, another would-be assassin camped out for 12 hours in the brush outside of Trump International Golf Club, armed with a loaded rifle, burner phones, a GoPro, hoping to finish the job. Less than 2 months later, a healthcare CEO was gunned down in cold blood on a New York street by a left-wing extremist who called his victim a parasite who had it coming. Within days, left-wing activists had made the murderer a folk hero. In California, they pushed a ballot measure named in his honor. A poll taken 10 days after the murder found that nearly half of very liberal Americans had a favorable view of the killer, whereas just 8% of very conservative Americans felt the same. Then came an all-out war on immigration and customs enforcement. Across the country, federal officers were hunted like prey. They were attacked, surrounded, ambushed, and shot at. Their facilities were firebombed. There were arrests for arson, for assault, for violent threats and doxing, but the violence continued to escalate. On July 4th, 11 members of an Antifa terror cell carried out a coordinated ambush on an ICE facility in Texas. They arrived in 2 vehicles, loaded with semi-automatic rifles, handguns, Molotov cocktails, body armor, and encrypted radios. Their gear was painted with a circle A for Antifa. They detonated fireworks to lure officers out into the open and then opened fire and kept shooting until their guns jammed. One cop was struck in the neck and critically wounded while racing to respond. Just 3 weeks later, a transgender shooter entered a Catholic elementary school in Minneapolis and opened fire on hundreds of children while they prayed. Dozens were wounded. 2 little children, a 10-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy, were killed. The shooter marked his guns with slogans like, "Where is your God now?" and posted videos using an image of Christ for target practice. 2 weeks after that, Charlie Kirk was murdered while speaking to students in Utah. The killer told friends and family he did it because Charlie was full of hate. Social media exploded with gloating celebration. Thousands upon thousands of people journalists, professors, and government employees could not contain their glee that a father of 2 young children had been gunned down in broad daylight. When Americans gathered to mourn him, they were attacked there too. In El Paso, an arsonist set fire to a church holding a vigil in his memory. A week later, a man opened fire into an ABC news station in Sacramento just days after the network suspended Jimmy Kimmel's show. Police found anti-Trump writings in his car and a handwritten note that read, "Patel, Bongino, and Pam Bondi, they're next." And just last week, an anarchist radical was arrested for placing a $45,000 bounty on Pam Bondi, posting an image of the Attorney General with a sniper dot on her head. The caption read, "Wanted, dead or alive, preferably dead." A week after the ABC shooting, a sniper opened fire on an ICE facility in Dallas, killing multiple people. Investigators recovered shell casings etched with the words, "Anti-ICE." And this month, a man who flew across the country to murder Justice Brett Kavanaugh received a sentence of just 8 years. He brought a gun, ammunition, a knife, duct tape, and zip ties to kill a sitting Supreme Court justice in his own home while his wife and kids were present because he didn't like the way he might rule on gun control or abortion. This is the nature of political violence in America today. It's driven by a system far larger than the people who commit the act itself. We've seen this system in action. We have not forgotten what happened in 2020. 5 years ago, violent mobs burned and looted their way through our cities. The press called the riots mostly peaceful, though. Ivy League academics celebrated them as righteous acts of resistance. The wealthy corporations in the world donated billions to keep them going. Vice presidential candidates bailed rioters out of jail. Prosecutors declined charges. Judges released arsonists and anarchists just hours after their arrests. The same public health experts who banned funerals and shut down churches declared mass protests justified because racism is a public health crisis. Politicians reserve their outrage not for criminals torching police precincts, but for the officers trying to defend them. The largest cities in the nation slashed their police budgets by hundreds of millions of dollars, unleashing a deadly wave of violent crime on a scale not seen in decades, the largest single-year increase in murders in more than a century. The activists on the ground claimed to be revolutionaries fighting the powers that be. But the truth is, they were backed by the full force of the ruling regime. The mobs that torch cities, the radicals who ambush ICE agents, the activists who terrorize judges at their homes, all of them are foot soldiers in the same regime. A regime whose foundational ideology is that we're born either as victims or oppressors, and it is the duty of revolutionaries to impose their vision of equity upon us all. This sustained campaign of violence is explicitly and specifically political. It is motivated by a distinct and fanatical ideology, rabidly anti-American, anti-Western, and anti-civilization itself. It is a worldview that indicts the United States as an illegitimate nation born in evil. By now, most Americans have heard this language. It has dominated our public life for years. These are not fringe ideas any longer. They have not just been tolerated, but actively embraced, repeated, and amplified through the largest megaphones in our country. To my friends on the other side of the dais who may take offense with these categorizations, how often have we heard Democrats praise these radicals for their idealism? How many elected officials have called riots the language of the unheard? The violence stalking our streets today is a feature, not a bug. There is an evil but consistent logic to it. It's the natural and logical result of the ideology itself. If the violent elements' ideals were so praiseworthy, then the system which obstructs their fulfillment is to blame. And why work within a blameworthy system for praiseworthy ends? To these people and this movement, the only acceptable goal is the destruction of the system and its leaders. The central idea of every revolutionary project is that utopia must be achieved through any means necessary. If you truly believe that Charlie Kirk is an existential threat to your safety, and you've bought into the nonsense that words are violence, then silencing him by any means could seem necessary. If you believe that mass migration is an inalienable right, then opening the floodgates to uncontrolled immigration, tearing down the border and attacking those who defend it might look like justice to you. If you believe that America was conceived in murder and built on stolen land, then you feel no moral obligation to respect and obey its laws. If you truly believe the police are the armed enforcers of racist oppression who indiscriminately murder innocent victims in the streets, then you might see violence against an officer as an act of brave resistance. When Charlie Kirk was murdered, one of his killer's bullets was engraved with the message, "Hey, fascist, catch." But who taught him that Charlie Kirk was a fascist? Who convinced him, I should say, that Charlie's hate made his murder a righteous act? Who told him over and over again that people who believe what Charlie Kirk believed are threats to our democracy? He didn't invent that worldview. He learned it, as did each and every one of the arsonists, assassins, and militants who came before him. Perhaps the people in power who said these things didn't really believe them, but clearly some of the people who listened to them did. And now they are taking those ideas to their final logical conclusion. Enough. We are faced with only two paths. Either we confront this political violence and end it, or it will end us. And I can think of no better person to introduce this topic than the late Charlie Kirk himself. I'm going to show a quick video before we go to the ranking member of him speaking on this precise subject, and I hope everyone would listen closely and heed his warning.
Now on Thursday, more violence from the radical left, this time directed at Turning Point USA and their group on the campus of UC Davis. Here with more, Turning Point USA founder, CEO Charlie Kirk. It's interesting, we were texting, about a week ago? And I kept saying, you know, it takes a lot of courage for you and your group and these young kids to be setting up in these hostile environments on college campuses. And, you know, lo and behold, it's not the first time it's happened, but we'll show the video as you're speaking. Tell us everything that went on.
Yeah, it's shocking stuff. It's a pattern now. We're seeing this happening on more and more campuses. So at the University of California, Davis, our brave Turning Point USA chapter was set to host Brandon Tatum as a Prove Me Wrong event. Goes up, sets a table. Anyone can go and have free speech and dialogue if they disagree. Antifa showed up, full masked, black outfits. They came in, took our gear, destroyed our tables, basically made the students had to flee, and the police did nothing to intervene, nothing whatsoever. Our courageous students had such resolve and fortitude that after this incident happened, they regathered and tried to do the event still about an hour later, but it wasn't the same, of course. This is after one of our Turning Point USA students at University of Texas, Dallas, had a bike lock thrown at her and actually had to be hospitalized for this treatment. Sean, we are seeing a disturbing pattern from the radical left, and we have data to now support it. According to the National Contagion Research Institute, 48% of left-of-center respondents say that it's justified to murder Elon Musk. 53% say that it would be justified to murder President Donald Trump. There are ballot measures in California that are being measured by far-left activists that are being named, I should say, after Luigi Maggioni. We have to take a step back here and ask our question, what's really going on here? There's a deeper thing than just political disagreement. If you are on the front lines, like our Turning Point USA students, you are potentially putting your safety, your well-being, and God forbid, your life in jeopardy for simply being a conservative on a college campus.
Ranking Member Welsh.
Thank you very much.
And then, with the room holding its breath, Chairman Eric Schmitt cued the clip. Charlie Kirk on screen, warning that the new normal is not debate, but intimidation, not argument, but force. He described a campus table overturned at UC Davis, students in flight, and police who did nothing to intervene. He spoke of a bike lock hurled at a young organizer in Texas, and he invoked numbers. He said they came from the National Contagion Research Institute, claiming that shocking shares of respondents justified murder against public figures. It was a grim reel, delivered with the cadence of a warning siren. Moments earlier, in his opening statement, Schmitt had laid out a sweeping indictment of the age. Attempted assassinations, arson at churches, bombings, sniper fire, attacks on ICE, a campaign of threats against public officials. He framed it as a system, a militant ideology that rewards violence and punishes order. And as the video ended, the chairman's message sharpened into a single imperative. Listen and heed the warning. What does a moment like this reveal? That Congress is not only a forum for laws, but a stage for moral clarity or moral confusion. When a senator catalogues blood and fire, he is not merely citing events, he is pressing a question to the heart of the republic. Do we still believe that the Constitution, the courts, and the ballot box are enough? Or have we surrendered to the temptation that might make right when the vote goes the other way? The hearing was called On Politically Violent Attacks and the Threat to Our Constitutional Order. That phrasing matters. It admits a brutal truth. Violence is not just a crime against a person, it is a veto against the people. It tells families to stay home, voters to be silent, speakers to self-censor, and officials to look over their shoulders. It turns citizenship into a wager of fear. Schmitt asserted that this violence is coordinated, ideological, and escalating, that it is not random, but targeted, not incidental, but instrumental. In his retelling, the common thread is justification, that the ends are righteous enough to sanctify the means. He said a Supreme Court justice was hunted because of how he might rule, that federal officers were hunted like prey, that churches were set ablaze, that newsroom glass shattered. He described slogans scratched into bullets and masks black as night, and he asked the question every civilization eventually faces: who taught them to call their enemies subhuman, to call their murders justice? By invoking the language of regime and revolution, he forced the hearing to confront an old and terrible logic. If the system is illegitimate, then the acts that topple it are, by definition, moral. That is the ethic of the guillotine. It is not new, but it is always deadly. The video of Charlie Kirk, placed here like a coda before the ranking member spoke, was more than an evidentiary exhibit. It was a rhetorical hinge. Kirk's story was the campus-level echo of the senator's national narrative. Students against masked agitators, free speech against mob disruption, law enforcement absent when it mattered most. He described young conservatives who regathered after being attacked, stubborn enough to try again. Whether one accepts his statistics, his causality, or his conclusions, the picture he painted was stark. Public square as battlefield, the microphone as a magnet for fists. Strip away the politics, and what remains is the same haunting image: Americans looking over their shoulders before they speak. In hearings like this, facts are not just recited, they are arranged to reveal character. Who said what matters because character is the currency of leadership? The chairman said the violence is the natural and logical result of an ideology that divides the world into oppressors and victims. Kirk said that even tabling for debate now carries risk. These are claims, some disputed, some unverified in the moment, all freighted with consequence. But the through line is unmistakable. Our political class is now forced to answer whether it will tolerate, excuse, or finally condemn political violence without caveat, no matter who wields it, no matter whom it targets. The measure of a constitutional order is not how it treats its friends, but how it restrains its allies and protects its opponents. That is the hard test of justice. That is the lonely work of statesmanship. There is, beneath the rhetoric, an even deeper current: the moral education of a nation. Children learn from what we reward. Citizens learn from what we refuse to punish. If mobs win the day, if saboteurs are treated as martyrs, if prosecutors avert their gaze while commentators wink at the camera, then the lesson is simple. The cudgel persuades where the argument cannot, and a country that accepts that bargain, left or right, will not be governed by law for long. Violence doesn't just injure a body, it mutilates the civic imagination. It shrinks what is sayable. It narrows what is thinkable. It convinces the timid that democracy is a dangerous sport and only the reckless play it. But there is another lesson available, and it belongs to us. We can insist that Congress act as steward of norms, not just a stage for sound bites. We can demand that prosecutors enforce the law without regard to the jersey. We can honor the right to speak, by protecting the right to be heard. And we can remember that the American experiment, this improbable republic stitched from argument and amendment, requires courage that is not theatrical, but disciplined. Courage that keeps a cool head when the crowd is hot. Courage that sees the image of a fellow citizen where the partisan sees only an enemy. That courage is not passive. It prosecutes crimes swiftly. It guards courthouses and campuses alike. It names the evil of political violence without disclaimers and without applause. Here, at the end of this hearing's opening act, the stakes are painfully clear. A nation divided can still be governed. A nation intimidated cannot. The Constitution is paper until people of character choose to bear its burdens, judges who resist the mob, police who uphold the law, legislators who speak truth without lighting matches, citizens who refuse the intoxicant of rage. That is how a free people answer the siren call of force, not with fear, not with revenge, but with law, with courage, with a stubborn fidelity to the dignity of every American who dares to speak. The moral is simple, and it is old. Ideas must defeat ideas. Violence must never be our argument. If you believe that, if you want a Congress that stands firm when the heat rises, stand with us. Subscribe to the Congress Brief. Support our work to expose the truth, to lift up the facts, and to defend the ancient, fragile promise that in America we settle our disputes not with fire, but with words.